Well, welcome everybody to our session here, Three Trends in Observability, Insights from Industry Leaders. Thank you for taking the time to be at the session. I think you'll find it a fun and productive discussion with our distinguished panel that we have. So we've got a few folks here, from Google, as well as our key ISV and software partners in the space. Samir Nori, I lead up our infrastructure and DevOps partner marketing function. I have the distinct pleasure of hosting this panel with Manisha Verma. I'll let Manisha introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Manisha. I work at Google Cloud on developing strategic partnerships with our DevOps ecosystem, specifically with companies in CI/CD, observability, and config management.
Awesome. And we'll obviously have our distinguished panel introduce themselves in a second here. So just in terms of the key focus for this session, we're really going to discuss state of observability, trends that our partners here see in the space, and we think they really fall into three big categories, right? We're going to cover a range of topics today. One of them fits in the bucket of observability and how the space has evolved. There's different definitions, frameworks, components. Our panel will talk about that. We're going to talk about generative AI. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't cover that, based on everything you've heard, at the conference and the keynote and the different sessions. And we'll talk about containers and serverless, right? So those are going to be our three main buckets of, topics of discussion and the discussion we're going to have here. So with that, I want to start by introducing our panel. I'm going to go starting with Ian. Ian, if you can, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at Chronosphere, how you work with customers, and a little bit about the partnership with Google.
Cool, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Ian. I'm Field CTO at Chronosphere, and for me, that's a primarily customer-facing role, part of the go-to-market organization, part of the dark side of sales and marketing and customer success. And for us, Chronosphere is focused mainly on the part of the market that is either adopted or is adopting cloud-native technologies at scale. So part of my role is obviously talking to customers and working with our customer-facing teams about what are they seeing, what are they needing as they go down this pathway of adopting and really using these technologies as competitive differentiation. And then taking that information and insights back to product and engineering as we continue to improve our value proposition, all those kinds of things. On the partnership level, I work closely with marketing and our partnerships organization. And obviously, Google is a key partner on a couple of different fronts. Number one, all of our customer SaaS environments are deployed in GCP. Thank you for the reliability. That's a key part of it. But then also, at the sort of broader level, Google is a key partner for us in that Google Ventures is a key investor as well.
Praneet, over to you.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Praneet. I'm a senior solutions engineer at Datadog, working with major accounts on the West Coast. And I myself take a very systems-oriented approach to observability. And building out observability cultures is what we do with our major accounts on the West Coast. Running advanced workshops around APM tracing mechanics, profiling, just the whole gamut of Datadog product suites, and just across the observability space in general. We've invested heavily in the Google Cloud integration and just the partnership. We really believe in having that pivotability between all observability data, and Google Cloud's offerings have been very beneficial in that. And just co-marketing together and working together has been just extremely beneficial.
Wayne?
Yeah, how you doing? So I'm Wayne Seeger. I'm the global field CTO at Dynatrace. I've been there for about 8.5 years now. And basically part of my role is spending a lot of time with our customers and really helping them take advantage of the platform. And I like to say, from a business side, right? We try to make sure that we can keep planes taking off. We make sure that when you go to the grocery store, you can actually check out and you're not being frustrated, right? So that's basically where we, kind of focus a lot of our time and effort. And certainly grateful for a lot of the partnership that we've had with Google over the years. Obviously we run parts of our own platform in Google, in addition to a lot of the other providers, but also as well being able to integrate deeply with the platform, since a lot of the customers utilize those services to run their own business, right? So very important to have visibility there.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you for the partnership, everybody. I want to start with taking a step back. And so we've gone from traditional thinking around monitoring, which essentially existed as an IT concept since the advent of the internet, to more broader definitions of observability around monitoring, logging, management, collaboration, AI ops, etc. What do you think of observability as a framework and its components? Ian?
Yeah, so I think it's important when you think about the evolution and all the other things, like there's more logs, there's different kind of terms and all that kind of thing. It's important to take a step back, and the key outcomes are the same as they always were. We need to be able to understand performance and issues, allow engineers and operators to solve these things, provide excellent service and uptime for their applications to drive business outcomes. Like that's table stakes. But the context and conditions have really changed, particularly with cloud and then cloud native technologies, microservices and containers. So you have a lot more complexity, right? We used to have monoliths, now we have these complex interdependencies. Not all of the request chain is being touched by the same technology stack. Maybe you have a combination of serverless and microservices, maybe some legacy monolith in the back end. And so being able to sift through all of that data from an end user perspective is obviously quite difficult. But secondarily, particularly as you really invest in cloud native, the geometric explosion of data poses another set of problems. Number one, human beings can't pass through it. So you obviously need automation there, but there's cost, performance, reliability implications of all of this as well. And so if you think about a framework, things like instrumentation, dashboarding, query language, these are all like things that you absolutely should be thinking about. And obviously they're part of many products on the market or even open source solutions. But I think one thing that's maybe missing that we need to start really integrating, particularly for those of us who are on this cloud native bent, is this aspect of data control and refinement and making sure that it's actually valuable. So if we're able to understand what data we're using, the outcomes that we're trying to drive towards and refine that data down, it has really interesting implications because the opposite side of it is that we just go, hey, I can't afford to go and do this instrumentation. I can't go and collect data from my pre-production environment because it's too expensive or maybe it has a performance impact on all these other things. So said another way, the observability framework really needs to make sure that ROI, obviously it's a sales term, but return on investment, right? Make sure the investment piece doesn't just grow astronomically, despite all the cool things that we've done on the return side. Add new features and functionality to drive those better key outcomes.
Praneet?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think taking a systems theory approach to it is really understanding, okay, what's my system's homeostasis? So that became harder when you're looking at up-down signals, and then now you have all this geometric explosion of data. You have so much distributed data. How are you actually able to forecast and proactively approach observability where it used to be just very, very reactive? And that's where, the approach that, we consider around central observability is getting control of that data and really kind of localizing it. But then how are you utilizing that data to actually say, hey, what's my baseline? And then what is a deviation from that baseline, right? It could be whatever type of system, but just cataloging that and actually learning that and actually propagating that across major business units really is key around that.
Yeah, I think it definitely is confusing, right? When you start talking about the different terms that are out there, I think everybody's probably heard monitoring, observability, telemetry, you name it. It's like alphabet soup. But the way I like to look at it is if you think about monitoring was always kind of very much about is it up or is it down? Is it fast or is it slow, right? That was kind of very much reactionary or just trying to understand what was going on. When you look at the observability state, the way I like to look at it is it takes you to a point where, yes, you're still using it to get those answers about is something up, is something down, is it working? But being able, when you really dive into it, to actually use that rich data that you now have a plethora of, being able to use that and actually take that to make kind of business decisions, right? Being able to understand, okay, this transaction was related from this user segment. And so for some reason, this user segment has a better performance or a better experience and maybe converts better or does something differently than another one, right? All that data is there from an observability platform. It's all there to use. So I think now really tapping into that and being able to use that. And that, to Ian's point, takes the real ROI, right? That helps your ROI because now you're getting more value back from your initial investment in observability.
Great. Let's take a customer use case. A key concern for a lot of enterprises is around security and compliance and privacy and adapting to industry changing and specific regulation. how does observability help businesses maintain a strong security posture and comply to these ever-evolving regulations? Ian?
Yeah, I think maybe three things that I want to talk about here. So number one, when you think about observability data and your security use cases, there's a lot of value of cross-pollination and making sure the observability data can be used to support some of these security use cases, number one, rather than treating them entirely as a silo. So being able to say, similar to the kinds of things that Wayne talked about, like, oh, well, what is the business impact of the security incident? Could I understand which customers had a performance impact on the observability side, help justify some of the decisions we make on the security side? Secondarily, on the regulatory, so many companies have sensitive data, and with these complex interdependencies, how do I separate out some of that data for sensitivity purposes, but don't introduce more friction when on-call engineers are trying to solve a problem that maps through this dependency that's quite sensitive? It's a complex, tricky problem. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but it's definitely something that the solutions themselves need to support and be flexible towards. And on the third piece of it, both security and observability solutions have potentially very large impacts on system performance, right? The collection of all of this data can be quite problematic, and you've got sampling and all these other things, but ultimately you need to make intelligent decisions. There's no one size fits all. So generally as an engineering organization, and even as a team, you need to make some choices and trade-offs intelligently, and this might be things like dynamic instrumentation. It could be, I need to post-process my data more effectively. And this also has impact on, again, what can I get out of that solution? Is it going to be cost-effective? Is it going to be timely?
Yeah, agreed there. And I think where we really have taken our approach is looking at application security, right? The security space can get so saturated with all these signals. Is what's different from a signals intelligence perspective? So at Datadog, we really looked at application security monitoring as, hey, these are my vulnerabilities. This is the entire surface area. And applications represent such a large sort of component that get leveraged by attacks, right? You think of like Log4j, you think of Log4Shell. All these applications out there in the open, they're very, very vulnerable. So how can we supplement that data from, data we're already getting, right? We're getting data from traces, we're getting data from logs. Like, how can we actually use that intelligent telemetry to assist these sort of signal intelligence use cases laterally with the DevSecOps branch that exists now? But at the same time, right, there is a sort of governance factor when it comes to this data explosion, is because one of the main things around the security world is false positive behavior and the explosions of fatigue, right? You have the knock, you have all these DevOps folks that are frustrated and exhausted by all this data that they're, having to absorb and actually scan alongside that observability data. So how can we really compress that? And then, as a factor of all that is just overhead of this data collection is, again, governance comes into play. Is, okay, what are my sort of shift left surface area sort of mapping that I can do to really say, okay, what do I need to monitor reactively so I'm not like over monitoring from a security perspective?
Yeah, and I think we're probably very much still in the early innings of the security and observability overlap, but we're starting to see that starting to happen more, right? You can even read some of the analyst reports out there that are kind of saying the same thing, but we're very early. I think one of the inflection points, and Praneet just mentioned it, right? Log4Shell was one of the big ones because observability solutions, right? So this was something we experienced a lot at Dynatrace, when Log4Shell came out and decided to ruin everybody's Christmas a few years ago, that I'm sure everybody's probably is, if you were involved in it, you have the scars. But what we saw was that the observability solutions actually saw faster than a lot of the security solutions that the vulnerabilities were there, right? We even saw that now with the more recent MoveIt vulnerability that came out. So I think we're kind of very early in kind of that cross-pollination happening, but I think that some of the security teams are starting to realize, real-time observability data still plays a big factor in and is starting to play a bigger role in as an additional signal from a security perspective, right? So there's definitely some overlap there, and I think that's going to continue to merge kind of as we go forward.
Awesome. So I think if we shift gears a little bit, we're obviously in an era of cloud native applications, microservices. So I'd like to ask our panel, starting with Ian, when you think about that specific deployment scenario, what are the key challenges for observability and how do you overcome them? Start with you, Ian.
Yeah. So as I've already alluded to, I really think one of the key challenges is just the volume of data. And this has impact in so many different ways. I'm assuming many people here have had that situation of like, well, we can't do that because it's too expensive. Or I did that and things got really slow in the observability solution. My alerts stopped firing, those kinds of things. So being able to manage the data growth, but then also be able to sift through the complexity starts to become this huge challenge. So you think even just about on the complexity front, ignore like the volume of data. We have all these new microservices we have to trace across these dependencies. You've got developers who now need to reason about things in entirely different teams' domain and that may come back or may go to some other dependency, or they may not even have visibility into where it goes from there. And these introduce all kinds of new problems. So there's both a, hey, this got really expensive and really difficult to handle, and also I've isolated myself from things that may be causing the root cause of my problem. So being able to sift through the data, control it, and then make use of it is really, I think, the core challenge. And I think there's a fair amount of agreement here. So yeah, and then I would say the last thing is that engineering organizations are really starting to see the issues with, like, not every engineer and every perspective is the same. So the tooling needs to sort of meet the engineer where they are, particularly in this more complex, stratified microservices containers type environment.
Praneet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you, again, look at it from a systems theory approach is where am I introducing end-by-end problems, right? As we alluded to just in the first question is, it's more than just up-down signals. This observability data is really compounding. And as soon as you get this distribution, as Ian mentioned, you're seeing this layer 1 through 7 problem just sort of unfold. So it becomes that layered approach where are my gaps, right? What's my total surface area? And if it is an end-by-end, like how can I control this data and how can I sort of govern it? And certain best practices and fundamentals really come out is, am I setting the correct SLOs? Am I actually setting correct metrics thresholds for my alerting functionality? And then from a business functioning perspective, is this also centralized as a knowledge base, right? Is everyone doing things on their own? Or are they actually moving in a business function to actually centralize this and standardize all these principles?
Yeah, it's definitely I think we've all kind of said it, the same challenges where now there's more things to get observability from. So we're getting explosion of data, but also that leads to the risk then of you're missing things, right? So it used to be in the monolithic world, right? You had 4 different systems that were responsible for doing like your entire application processing, and you just, everybody knew it, right? Now there's just new things, there's new cloud services, new stuff. And so, one of the things I've started to see a little bit is almost like this rise of kind of, let's say, platform engineering. And basically what that is, or what they've kind of started to put in place was kind of like almost like a framework or a guardrail to basically say, like, if you're going to deploy something, or if you're going to be a developer and you're going to deploy something, in order to get it deployed, you need to basically kind of have the box checked as to what observability you're going to have in place. You've defined kind of your SLOs, like Praneet was saying. Otherwise, you're not going to pass the build stage. You're not going to get it through the pipeline to get whatever it is that you're trying to do, get it deployed. And that we're starting to see more. And also what that does is I think people are starting to maybe overcorrect a little bit into the developer, you own it type of mantra. I think that works, but you have to give them, again, the guardrails, make their life easy, kind of developer experience, and kind of having, let's say, again, the platform engineering approach where things in terms of observability as a service is part of that, and just really almost like a checkbox as part of when they're deploying things through their pipeline.
Great. No, that's some very insightful answers on that topic. Switching gears, talking about Gen AI, how do you see Gen AI impacting your solutions, and I think the space in general? How should the audience think about taking advantage of that as this continues to evolve at a pretty fast clip?
Yeah, so I think for generative AI, at least the first pass, obviously there's a massive untapped potential here. Everyone's super excited about it. But I think number one for observability, the immediate 2 things are input and output. How do I ask my observability tool without having to go through an abstraction like a complex query language, right? Can I just ask it, hey, what's wrong with my service? Everyone would love that. And then the second piece is, well, when the data comes back, I'm sure everyone has that massive dashboard and the massive data set that comes back from a query, like, but what does this mean? And tying back to what I said before about meeting an engineer where they are, maybe they're a new engineer. They don't have all the institutional knowledge about what's going on. So having that summarized impact, I think, is important. But I think there's probably two things I want to say about from a caution perspective, and they obviously inform the way that we're building product at Chronosphere. Is one, engineers are a very sophisticated audience. Black boxes they generally don't like, so they want to be able to understand how the sausage is made. And for anyone who's played around with LLMs and all the things out there, you know there are hallucinations, there are inaccuracies. And if you're basing critical incident level decisions on that kind of thing, you need to be able to validate that and make sure it's accurate. So there's a little bit of skepticism there. And the second one I think is more about sort of like corporate legal compliance and those kinds of things. There's, I think, particularly in the enterprise, a reluctance to be, okay, well, when I give you inputs into generative AI, I don't want that to be then exposed to other customers or mingled. And so from an implementation perspective, I think being careful about not just taking off-the-shelf third-party APIs, routing customer data over to it, and then taking the results back. I think there's definitely a reluctance from at least a lot of the customers I'm talking to engage with that kind of initial MVP style engagement.
Yeah, this is very interesting for me. I've been studying perceptual AI since 2014, and just seeing all the sort of explosion in the space with just LLMs has been very, very interesting. I particularly remember when something called GANs came out to like actually generate art. It was a little creepy, a little weird, but they had some output. And now finally to be able to see code-like structures, like think like JSON data, like log payloads and traces, even as a directed acyclic graph being introduced as a data input where these LLMs can make inferences about them. One thing to really sort of consider here is LLMs are really limited by their context length. And as Ian mentioned, they can hallucinate quite effectively too. They are very, very confident in what they hallucinate. And so it's important for observability practitioners to think about compaction of that data and the actual precision of that data as well. If you feed an LLM incorrect data, it's going to start to reason about it and will learn that, hey, this is the reality, right? Because the way they function, right, it's just reinforcement learning. They're trying to aim for a reward. So it's really interesting just coming through all these years, just learning about like how are these models architected, how are they trained? We can't just throw them at a problem because there is compliance issues, there are legal issues. You can't just give just sensitive information and expect something that's viable as an output.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it very much in a short term, or probably the more realistic thing that we'll start to see is the things that allow to reduce friction in terms of using and getting answers out of an observability system. Basically, opening it up where more people can take advantage of it. I mean, even when you go, let's say, a higher level, right? So engineers, I mean, they have no problem, let's say, writing queries to get answers or get data back. But go a level above that. Somebody who doesn't really want to understand how to write a query just to be able to get a question about how many people were impacted by an incident yesterday, right? I think those are the things, the possibilities that the LLMs immediately open up to, particularly in the observability space. I think that has a lot of potential, and it has potential to happen relatively quickly with again a lot of the lesser of the downsides that some of the LLMs can have. And then I think then, it also presents the fact of, you can generate things like dashboards, right? That's another thing, even Ian mentioned that. But also even then, you can ask it a simple question around documentation, right? How many people love going around, Googling around to try and find the answer to something about some product's documentation, right? That's where LLMs, again, can have a very immediate impact in just pointing you to the right spot because it's reading the natural language of your question, and the documentation is written in a way that the LLM has been trained to give you the appropriate answer. I think that can reduce that friction and also increase the effectiveness in terms of adoption.
Right. So using AI to do better things faster. Right. I want to switch gears to open source a little bit. The importance of open platforms, open standards, and interoperability is growing, and observability tools are working more seamlessly together. We have initiatives like Open Telemetry, which are gaining momentum to create a unified approach to collecting and exporting telemetry data. In fact, Google is a big contributor to open source and the Open Telemetry initiative, and made significant contributions to its development. How do you see your company approaching the Open Telemetry Initiative, and how do your solutions interoperate in this space? We can start with maybe Wayne, you first.
Yeah, so I mean, I think OpenTel. I think one of the funny things about OpenTel when it kind of became, let's say, a bigger thing, a few years ago, kind of like the open standard. That a lot of people had this kind of like, I don't want to say misconception, but kind of this understanding of saying, oh, okay, this is now going to be the new thing that just replaces everything in observability, which obviously is not true. It's actually one of the best things in terms of being able to increase data quality. And get insights into layers that was difficult as a vendor to be able to get into, right? So I think that's been huge. And as in Dynatrace specifically, right, we've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort contributing into some of the open standards like the W3C trace context, which was now great to have a trace identifier that was actually agreed upon rather than everybody having something different that nobody knew what anything meant. So that's been probably one of the biggest benefits that you've seen out there. And from an OTel perspective, we basically treat it as a first-class citizen. So whether it's a trace that's coming from our system, from our agent, or from an external source, and being able to put that together into a single view, which is what everybody wants, I think is great. So I think that this space is really taken observability forward and helped adoption and helped people be able to utilize it better.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's just really just excellent for the space. And at Datadog, we've really contributed to the OTel collector and our own exporter. We expose our tracing libraries to augment the OTel out-of-the-box tracers. And as Wayne mentioned, as a first-class citizen, we want to make it indistinguishable in the platform. It's not just something different. I think where we really assist clients and just the space in general is, should I commit to OTel? It doesn't have to just be if I go OTel, there's no going back, right? You can take these hybrid approaches. You can take vendor proprietary, telemetry, bridge it with OTel, augment that OTel data, and then vice versa too. There's a lot of things you learn from the OTel community and around span context or W3C context or trace ID propagation, where all these APM contexts were so black box as it pertained to the past. Where we're really kind of unlocking that as a space. And at the end of the day, for the customer, it is really about that diversity of telemetry, right? Having more options is just better for the space overall, which is better for the vendors, right? So it's not necessarily a competitive thing that we look at it with.
Yeah, we've all worked at vendors who have proprietary agents, all that kind of thing, and that definitely was a state of the art a while ago. And obviously there's a value of it now, but a lot of the customers that I talk to are wanting to make sure that it's not all eggs in one basket, as you've said. But I think it's actually, interestingly, very powerful for the vendors and then subsequently for downstream customers, because now a lot of the effort that goes into, say, instrumenting a new technology, right, like a new data pipeline or something like that, it can be done once in OpenTelemetry, and it can be done with the insights and the expertise of engineers from Dynatrace and Datadog and Chronosphere working together, as opposed to sort of going off into different places. And then if you were to move between them from their proprietary places, oh, this looks completely different. So there's absolutely, I think instrumentation is one of those things that it's very much rising tide lifts all boats. For Chronosphere, we are a open source standards first and basically only solution. Because we're a slightly newer organization. And then one of the things that we're investing in with OpenTelemetry is specifically around, and you probably heard me say the word control, but even in the open source side of things, how can I control? So like tracing, for example, everyone knows about like head-based and tail-based sampling, but a lot of the times if you want to go and change head-based sampling in your application, you got to reload your application. So we've made some, I think, frankly, cool contributions there that allow you to do some stuff like dynamically go and change that, which benefits everyone, not just Chronosphere customers. And so I think that's really the core value of OpenTelemetry as a project, is like, I think it really has started to show its ability to lift the whole industry. Still a lot of work to go, and there's going to be a lot more work coming. But yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Thank you. Now, continuing to speak about open source, as container orchestration with Kubernetes becomes more and more prevalent, a lot of observability solutions are adapting to provide more comprehensive monitoring, logging, and tracing data and capabilities for containerized environments. If you think about this in the context of something like Google Kubernetes Engine or GKE, we've seen that we have master metrics, which is the monitoring and metrics data related to the Kubernetes control plane in the GKE cluster. And we have actually an active partnership with Dynatrace, Datadog, and Chronosphere in building these integrations and providing this metrics and data to our customers. Can you speak a little bit on to some of this, and how are your customers seeing the benefit of these integrations? Maybe we can start with Wayne.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it really comes down to, I mean, now that you're running, when you start running things, let's say on Kubernetes on GKE, right? So now you've obviously offloaded a section of the infrastructure, right? So the responsibility kind of changes, but you still want to be able to understand. You're still responsible for some of the health of that stuff. And so that's where, again, the partnership with Google on our side, on Dynatrace's side, where we're able to now get those additional data points, but then marry them together with the other insights that we're getting from the applications that are there to really give you, again, system health, right? So then if there's actually a problem with maybe you're undersized and you don't have auto-scaling enabled, you can actually understand that that's the problem that's impacting your system rather than kind of being blind to it, right? So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And again, one of the probably most important things that we need to make sure we do as we take advantage of more cloud services is still, again, getting the right telemetry for the things that we're responsible with, and have it correlated directly with how that impacts, again, the whole system, because that's where the time save comes in.
Yeah, certainly that abstraction layer has led to a common observability vernacular that's understandable across like the Kubernetes ecosystem. You think of Docker, you think of containerization. This helps, just observability at large, because there is that sort of standardization of metrics, traces, logs, and an expectation across business units when it comes to, how should I reason about this application? But I think what Wayne mentioned earlier was like a centralized platform engineering culture sort of develops, right? We've noticed that a lot of folks that do utilize GKE or Kubernetes, they're starting to build this sort of hybrid platform engineering culture, and observability really fits in with that, whether it be through a service mesh or whether it be through, even open telemetry. There is sort of this cataloging that starts to develop, and that just benefits the space at large again.
Yeah, from the customers we talk to, many of them on GCP, many of them in a hybrid motion or moving, it's absolutely table stakes, right? You have to know what your infrastructure is doing, and just as the other panelists have said, tying that up into the business level problems, particularly with a move towards SLO driven operations, right? Or incident management. It's like, I don't want to necessarily alert every time my CPU spikes. I want to know when the CPU spikes, and that's causing me to lose revenue. So tying that together and not going bottoms up like I think traditionally in the industry have gone, but like really go top down. It doesn't obfuscate the value of it, but it really means that you have to be very particular about making sure all of those things are in place before you need them. And so that definitely speaks to the partnership and the integrations that we've made sure to build. And then I think one of the great things from a GCP perspective and the expertise in GKE is being able to filter that through to customers who may be adopting Kubernetes for the first time and like, well, what are the things I don't know? I need that. So being able to help filter that through and provide some of that diffuse expertise to those customers, and like these are best practices, has been a really big part of the partnership that we've had.
Awesome, thanks. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about serverless computing. Now, with the increasing evolution and adoption of serverless computing, observability solutions are evolving to provide better insights into serverless functions, things like function performance or tracing execution, etc. Can you speak to the customer demand for some of these, and in particular, the value of integrations like, for example, the ones we've had more recently with Google Cloud Run, which is our serverless platform? We can start with you, Wayne.
Yeah, so I think serverless specifically, has definitely grown pretty much exponentially in terms of usage over the years. I mean, I think initially when people started using serverless or functions, they were using it for almost task-oriented type of stuff. It wasn't, let's say, part of the critical application or the critical revenue-generating applications for a business. That has started to change. I mean, we're definitely starting to see that happen more frequently, and for obvious reasons. I mean, there's obviously benefits to doing that. And where I'm seeing, specifically in the observability space, this is kind of where it almost like open telemetry a little bit ties into it, right? Because you now have like an open framework that is now part of a serverless function, so it continues to be lightweight, it continues to be in an open standard, and being able to get telemetry from it. So there's actually a lot of synergies that we're seeing between those, particularly again getting a lot of those open kind of standard tracing and metrics and stuff like that from those platforms, right? So I think that's actually a big thing that we're seeing now starting to happen, and probably continuing going forward.
Yeah, I think, again, speaking to the abstraction that serverless can introduce, right? Now you've abstracted away that infrastructure layer. When we think of Kubernetes, there's a lot of orchestration that's been managed and a lot of sort of auto-scaling, spin up, tear down, that gets managed. Obviously, there's health metrics around that. So you have to shift gears around serverless, thinking of like cold starts or just really, really microscopic latency. You have to look at those execution times overall. You have to look at those outlier patterns. But then there's also cost governance, right? Like there's a governance pattern between, okay, serverless can really, really scale up, and how do I actually quickly monitor and alert on those sort of cost governance patterns? That's extremely important. So I think from our angle, and I think just the space overall, is treat it like standardization, right? Like when there's outbound calls or where there's serverless integration, through Google or through APM or through any sort of instrumentation, treat it just like any other service pattern where there's minimizing context shift for your operators, because the worst thing you can do is actually just introduce context shifting, right? Is treat it completely differently, completely different namespaces. That introduces more context shifting. And we've talked about just that explosion of data time and time again. And that's just really important to think about.
Yeah, I think related to what Wayne said, early on, the shift was, hey, we're adopting this and it's a silo. And I think a lot of the early tooling represented that, because it really wasn't connected to Praneet's point. And you take that first generation of tools that gave you insight about serverless functions and Cloud Run, and you start to say, okay, well, I'm going to use this for a critical part of my workflow because it's the best tool for the job, right? It's what every engineering organization wants. I need to be able to tailor what I'm doing. Oh, I found this use case, which is ideal for it, but now it's part of that big complex whole we keep talking about. But, oh no, the insights, the observability for that stuff is completely siloed off. I have to context switch and it doesn't let me trace through. I basically have a black hole. And that, I think, has been a real problem. And it's almost caused a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing, where sort of that second phase of adoption of serverless was a little bit held back, particularly in larger, more complex environments, because the observability tooling didn't treat things, at least from like even a request perspective, homogeneously, right? There's obviously things, as you said, like cold start, and these are very specific to the technology, but hey, a request going through anything should be treated like a request going through anything. So there's definitely a really big interest we see from people doing things like that. And I think interestingly, particularly for serving customer-facing elements for front end, rather than having your traditional like front end separation that leads into like a back end service. Front end service, back end service now is like, oh, all these requests are going to go through serverless from my mobile device, but now you're okay. You need to connect into mobile and your browser, and then I need to connect to them. So it's all that complexity feeding in together is going to drive more of that adoption and being able to get value. So it's the right tool in the toolbox for the right time.
Excellent. So I think shifting gears, talking about a little different topic, and we're also coming up on time. But I guess my question for starting with Wayne is, how should folks think about cost optimization, resource allocation when it comes to better cost efficiency from an observability viewpoint?
Yeah, so I think that's obviously something people have started to pay more attention to now. Probably over the last few years, people have kind of been in the exuberance of building and not necessarily caring about the cost or what that basically optimizing it, just getting things out there, and however much it costs. So I think people are definitely now looking at that with a little bit more scrutiny to say, look, we've deployed a lot of this stuff, it works great, but we could probably optimize this. We could either take advantage of a different service that saves cost and has the same performance. And observability, of course, has a big factor in that, because you're already getting telemetry from those services, right? So you understand how they're used, how often they're used, how frequent they're used, And then secondly, you can understand, are you over allocated somewhere, right? How many times have I seen it where somebody deploys an application and they've got, they're using, different VMs, different cloud services out there that are like 10% utilized, right? So they're way overspending for something that doesn't need to be there. And it's pretty easy to downsize that, right? It's easy, it's relatively simple to change that versus, back in the old data center days, you ordered that big machine in the data center and it was, you were underutilizing it. Well, you got to find something else to put on it, right? You didn't have the option to just scale it down. So I think that when you look at those two aspects, that's where observability really comes in, is giving you that insight and being able to see where you're over provisioned and where cost savings can come into play.
Yeah, and particularly with what we're doing, just echoing Wayne's thoughts here, is just cloud cost management in general. At Datadog, our integrations, we're introducing cloud cost management as a factor of utilization, so you can actually see, okay, is this underutilized? Is this under-provisioned, over-provisioned? Can I scale that up and down? We've also looked at exercises where we can actually use a lot of that rich observability data, and I'm talking about profiling, right? Where you can actually look at code level, profiles, look at deadlocks, look at wait times, and actually optimize code for maximum utilization. But also assisting, a lot of our customers around, hey, if you have a data center with fixed allocation, right? And that's actually impacting your business. There's a lot of data pipelining. There's a lot of AI workloads now. Where can we actually leverage the cloud to actually scale up at a very fast rate? Because you can't do that at a data center. There's bandwidth limitations. There's hardware limitations, right? So it's a dual factor. It's not always just about cutting costs. It's more about cost movement, right? Is where can we best utilize the cloud resources that we have available to us?
Yeah, we talked before about cross-pollination between security use cases and observability, and just like Wayne said, I think it's a very similar thing. There's immense value in the observability data for outcomes other than what traditionally observability monitoring have done. So that's absolutely true. But I think there are patterns that we can take from FinOps, right? When you think about, oh, hey, I really want to make sure that I'm getting the most value out of my hardware and my GCP spend and all these other things. And they should also be applied to observability tooling itself and the telemetry generation, because the pattern we're seeing is that more and more often observability for an engineering organization is a top 3 cost. And particularly after the last few years of runaway growth and everything like that, people are like, oh, is this really commensurate value with the bill that I'm seeing? And so cost attribution, being able to understand, am I utilizing the data? What value does it bring me? All of those concepts we've seen a lot of high demand from the market for, and we've been able to bring some of those to bear within our product as well. So I think it's understanding that data collection and the analysis and the insight and getting value from all these things is the same. It's across security, it's across FinOps, it's across observability. And so it's not just, oh, we can use observability data to help those things, but we should also take a little bit of the cues from, well, what value are we getting from some of those other use cases as well?
Excellent. I'd like to thank our panelists for covering a range of topics.